Erdogan,
in this cabinet.
we gave you, through
I
this
said,
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave, but they had to use our military.
What about Vance?
If you
Well, that's unprecedented. This is not the kind of thing we usually see on C-SPAN. It's a little more exciting than C-SPAN usually is, and for a reason. So I wanted to do a breakdown of what happened in this interaction for a couple of reasons. First off, I'm a coach, a business coach. I analyze and discuss what's going on inside people's heads, usually to help them directly, not just to analyze third person, but to help people manage situations, sometimes like this, sometimes others. And having to watch this video over and over again, because it keeps showing up in social media, I thought that it would be interesting to discuss the human interactions aside from all the politics. But then I also want to discuss some of the cultural implications and some other things that are going on in this that are relevant. So before we really dive in and do this breakdown video, now the whole interaction is about 9 minutes long, about 7 minutes long. With my commentary, it'll probably be twice that, so I hope you'll bear with me. I think you'll find it interesting. A couple points to make. One is, we never see this because this never happens, right? These conversations, the yelling, the going back and forth, totally happen behind closed doors, because diplomacy is an art form, and the communication, the messaging is an art form. So someone makes sure that every word is crafted just the right way that it's supposed to be. The idea that you would have two presidents and a whole bunch of their subordinate leaders, vice presidents, secretaries, etc., all in one room with cameras live for an hour is totally unprecedented and kind of nuts from a diplomatic standpoint. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics, judging who's right, who's wrong. I am going to get into discussing what is effective and what is not effective in communication. You know, what each of the men could have done in different times to communicate more effectively. And I do also want to briefly mention the cultural aspect. So in the American culture, in our culture, in my culture, and in most cultures based on British culture, reserved, stiff upper lip British culture, what we find is that talking over someone is rude, right? You speak, I speak, I'm supposed to wait till you're done to speak. In many other cultures, including Latin American cultures and Eastern European, Ukrainian cultures, in a heated conversation, it's not considered rude to grab the conversation, to talk over each other. That's just heated conversation. Except when it is a superior and an inferior, which in this case, these are two heads of state, so they should not be considered as superior or inferior, but there's some personal dynamics going on, some other things happening as well. But that's something I wanted to point out. So anyone who's like, well, Zelenskyy was so rude trying to interrupt the president was having a casual but heated conversation with the other president, is the actual cultural dynamic that's happening from Zelenskyy's perspective. Now, from Trump's perspective, maybe he was rude interrupting him, maybe not. We're going to get into that. But I just want to bring up that cultural point, which is highly relevant. But the key thing is, this is something we almost never see, and I'm not going to get into what everyone's talking about. Was Zelenskyy rude? Was Trump rude? Blah, blah, blah. We never should have seen it at all. So this whole thing has nothing to do with any of that, but I think there's a lot we can learn from watching this interaction. So let's go back to 42 minutes here, which is about where it starts. And what you're going to see is that President Zelenskyy is talking about what happened last time they made a deal with Putin, and basically expressing that he can't trust Putin because Putin doesn't keep his deals, and is then going to ask, what kind of diplomacy are you speaking about? What do you mean? And that's kind of when things go off the rails.
Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with
All right, so right there, it sounds like Vice President Vance is done. I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to save your country. Pause. And so President Zelenskyy is ready to jump in. This is an ongoing conversation. Keep in mind, we are 42 minutes into this event, and they were probably talking a bit before it. They're in a casual, he says JD. They're in a casual conversation environment. Now, if you know JD Vance, he is someone who speaks somewhat formally, so he's saying Mr. President. And Zelensky is a comedic actor turned politician who has been leading a war for 3 years. So he is not as steeped in this kind of decorum. Now, maybe should have been briefed. It would have been more effective if instead of calling him JD, he'd said Mr. Vice President and used titles. That would have probably kept the temperature down a little bit. But this is where it starts to go off the rails because I believe inadvertently, Zelensky is having a more casual conversation, and Vice President Vance thinks he's having a more formal conversation. So that's your first place where it's getting messy here. But you see your first clash here.
With respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this.
All right, so this is a bit of a non sequitur. All right, Zelensky is asking what kind of diplomacy you're going to use because we can't trust Putin from our history. And J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, then says we're going to do the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country. To which Zelensky starts to respond, and at that point, Vice President Vance appears to be a bit offended, saying there's some undertone that I'm seeing of I'm trying to speak here. This is our house. You came into our house. You should shut up and listen, and you're not. And so he appears to get a little heated. Maybe this is intentional. Maybe it was not. But then he starts going into, don't litigate this for the American media. Now, keep in mind, this is an open conversation that they invited the media to, and they're 42 minutes into it. But so it's interesting that he's saying, don't discuss this in front of the media. That seems like an odd place to be going. But then he goes into, you guys are losing. You're losing the war. You need us, and you should be thanking us, but not thanking the U.S., thanking the president for trying to bring an end to the conflict. Now, this is a key point, and this is a place where Zelensky tripped up. Vance he's kind of saying, please stroke our ego, right? You should be thanking us, not our country, us. And Zelensky could have diffused this by addressing that point directly and saying, I have thanked you, because he's thanked the United States many times. I believe he's thanked Trump specifically. There was a tweet out around that I believe went out before this meeting where he thanked Trump and the United States. So he could have gotten into that and said, I have thanked you, and in case, now this is what I would have done in his place if I was, had the time to stop and think about it, which of course he didn't. This is all in real time. Nobody had a pause button live in this room. But if I were Zelensky and had time to plan it, I would say, Mr. Vice President, if there's been a misunderstanding, and if you have not heard me thank you before, let me make it clear right now. Thank you. Thank you, Vice President Vance. Thank you, President Trump, for all you have done. It has been indispensable, and we do appreciate everything you have done for us. And that would have diffused it, and that would have taken control of the situation. Unfortunately, Zelensky did not do that because, as happens, remember, we're 42 minutes in to this conversation where it's been Q&A and everything. People get tired. Plus, this is not a guy used to being in front of cameras. This is a guy used to being in front of war planning boards. And he's not used to being quick on his feet. And before you say, but he's an actor. Actors work from lines they have rehearsed. Many actors who are great rehearsed aren't quick on their feet. And I don't know if Zelensky is or not, but he definitely did trip up on this one. And he got into this issue of basically saying, I don't think you know what you're talking about, right? I work in this stuff all the time. I'm leading the war day in and day out. And you're trying to tell me how my war is going?
This
Have you
conflict.
ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring people.
All right. So Vance's response is interesting. It's very unhumble because Zelensky has a point. He hasn't been to Ukraine. Now, it is reasonable for him not to have gone to Ukraine. It is a war zone. Vance is the vice president. He's only been in office for about 6 weeks or so, 5 weeks at this point. Wouldn't have a chance to get there. And so you can see him stumble. You can see him be like, I've seen the stories. Now, he is the vice president of the United States. He has access to the intelligence from the CIA and the NSA and the DIA and all these organizations. So had he said, I have read intelligence briefings, I have gotten, concrete information, that would have sounded different. But instead he said, I've read the stories. I've heard the stories. And you can see Zelensky's response of rolling his eyes, making a little noise, because Zelenskyy is there every day, and Vance is saying, well, I've heard the stories.
You bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems?
So this is interesting. He says you bring them on a propaganda tour. So he's claiming something and then running right past it into a different thing. You bring them on a propaganda tour, so you're lying to people. And then, do you disagree you've had problems? And Zelenskyy is about to say, in war everyone has problems. So I'll let it play.
Bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's
I
respectful
will answer.
to come to the Oval Office
I
of the
will
United
answer.
States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
All right. So that was a good way to handle that, because Vance is badgering. He asked 3 questions in a row. He talked about the propaganda tours, and then he says, "Are you having problems?" Which, as he's about to say, it's war. Of course, there's problems. The enemy's trying to make us have problems. We're going to have problems. That's the nature of war. And then, do you think it's disrespectful? Which, this is the kind of question you only ask if you're trying to pick a fight. This is an escalatory question, not a de-escalatory question. Now, what's happening here? The impression I have, what I'm seeing, is that Vice President Vance he's getting upset. He has been triggered in some way. His emotions are rising, and so he feels the need to puff up and to push. And so Zelenskyy. Now, if you look at this, you'll see we've got President Trump here in the center. We got Vice President Vance right next to him, and then Marco Rubio's next to him. I believe some of Zelensky's staff is to his right, but they're never on camera. So, I mean, the visual framing of this does make it look like Zelensky's on his own with all the U.S. people facing him. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate or not, but one thing you are going to see is the dynamic of Trump and Vance going back and forth, like parents scolding a child, which creates a very challenging dynamic. But so Zelenskyy, he says, let's slow it down. That's a lot of questions. Let me answer those questions.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
All right. So Zelenskyy made a mistake right there, where he said you. So anytime you say you bring it to the other party. So he had a point of agreement. Yes, we have problems in war. It's war. And then he says, everyone has problems in war, even you. So that triggered Trump. Trump got upset because he hears Zelenskyy say, you have problems, which is factually accurate, but can feel threatening. So Zelenskyy should not have said that. He should have just said, and this is not about rudeness, this is about effectiveness. He should have said, yes, we have problems. That is absolutely the case. And then he should have gotten to that point of it is not my intention to be rude. And if you feel I have been rude, that was not my intention, because we are in a diplomatic situation. And so we can write that off to culture. Remember, Zelenskyy is not a native English speaker, right? You can tell from his accent. He speaks it pretty well, but he's not a native English speaker. He's not an American. He doesn't know our culture. And this would be a place for him to diffuse by saying something like, if you feel I have come across as rude, that is not my intention. As you know, I was an actor who became a leader to lead my people and was thrust into a war I did not want. So I don't have as much protocol training as I might like. So if you feel I've been rude, I apologize for any impression of rudeness, right? That would have been a way to de-escalate. Not saying he did it wrong, but saying that would have been more effective. had he done that. But so Trump is triggered. Let's see what he says.
Bless,
You don't
God
know that.
bless, you
Don't-
will not
you
have
gotta-
a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
All right, now you see how surprised Zelenskyy is right there. That was a throwaway line. You're going to feel it. What he meant was Putin's going to keep coming. If he defeats Ukraine, he's going to move into Europe. That's going to affect America economically, possibly militarily. May have to defend, do an Article 5, defend NATO. That's what he meant by you're going to feel it. But it was rhetorically similar to you'll see what I'm talking about. But Trump then grabbed onto don't tell us how we're going to feel. Because if I say you're going to feel this way, that's very personal. That's me telling you something. And Trump grabbed onto this. And Zelenskyy, you can kind of see on his face, whoa, wait, what's he talking about? What's happening? Remember, not a native English speaker. This is why these conversations happen behind closed doors. And so he's thrown off guard.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're
I'm not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influenced.
We're going to feel very.
All right, so there, again, Zelensky's getting caught up in it. You can see on his face that he's receiving. He's saying, like, what? I'm not dictating how you're feeling. I'm not telling you anything. I just said what I think is going to happen. And then Vance jumps in. And so Zelenskyy is saying, I'm not saying that. And Trump and Vance are saying, yes, you are. Yes, you are. You're saying that. And then he gets caught up in it. And he says, you're going to feel influenced. This was not a good rhetorical move because he didn't have his feet firmly planted. See, when you're speaking in a group like this, in a conversation like this, you don't want to speak unless you have the floor. It is better to sit and listen. And he was doing that for a moment and then got caught up into it. And again, partly that's cultural, partly that's we're 43 minutes into this conversation. And partly that's just this isn't his training. But ideally, if you're in that situation, you would want to just sit and listen and let them talk themselves out, let them run until they've run out of words, and let them talk at you. And then when they're done, then you could say, are you done? May I speak? And this gets into what some people call the power politics of Jesus. When Jesus says, if they slap you on the cheek, turn the other cheek so they can slap you there too. That's not about being weak. It's about if they're coming at you over and over and over again, and you just kind of say, okay, all right, let it come, let it come, let it come. Okay, are you done? You hit both cheeks? Can I go now? It would show more humility. It would have been more effective.
Very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and
of
he
the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I was
You don't have the
saying-
card.
All right, so Trump is correct. He's not in a very good position in this conversation. Now, Trump doesn't look very good either, but Trump is controlling the conversation. At this moment, he is controlling the flow of the conversation. He has the podium, if you will, and Zelenskyy is getting frustrated, trying to grab back, trying to react, because this is our natural reaction. We don't want someone to talk over us. We don't want someone to take control over us. We want to assert ourselves, feeling that if we can just get our words out, then we will be able to effectively defend ourselves. But the issue is, anyone listening doesn't hear your words. They just watch you getting talked over, which means it looks both weak and rude.
Right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
Right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
Yeah.
what you're doing.
All right. Now, yeah, if you watch this power dynamic, Trump his posture is that of power. He's pointing, he's leaning in, and Zelenskyy has the posture of a child being yelled at. He's hunched in. He's kind of petulantly trying to respond. And again, these are not personal judgments. This is assessing what is happening on the in the frame. And so Zelenskyy is trying to prosecute a conversation that he's at the disadvantage of. So, and I've emphasized this point before, but he would be better to sit back. Probably not sit back too far, because if he sits back and looks like he's relaxing, he looks like he's not taking it seriously. But he would better to sit and attentively listen, like a student, because that is actually a power position versus trying to grab and trying to argue back and forth.
Is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm
That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned.
So in this place, Vice President Vance asked, have you said thank you once? And Zelensky said 2 or 3 times there. I've said thank you a lot of times. But he did not take control of the conversation to be heard to say it. So what he should have done to be more effective is when J.D. Vance says, have you said thank you once? There's a couple things good at. One would be to repeat the question. Have I said thank you once? And then J.D. Vance would have confirmed, yeah, have you said thank you once? Now he would have had the space to answer the question. Because you will notice, and Vance has done this a couple times, he'll ask a question and then keep talking, which creates an awkward dynamic for Zelenskyy because he can't really answer, but the answer is implied, and rhetorically that almost makes it sound like Zelenskyy is accepting that answer. So, by repeating the question back, it stops Vance. If you repeat someone else's words back, you are confirming. They can't talk over that without it sounding weird. So when Vance said, have you said thank you once? If Zelenskyy then repeated, have I said thank you once? Then Vance would have to stop what he was saying and say, yes, confirming, have you said thank you once? At that point, there would have been a spot, because if Vance had kept talking, then Zelenskyy could have just pulled him back to his question and would have said, no, have I said thank you once? Yes, I have, many times. And again, this would have been a chance to retake the conversation and say, but if you have not heard it, or if it has not been clear, let me say thank you right now. Now, if Vance then tried to talk over him then it would have been Zelenskyy saying, let me say thank you right now, and Vance blah, 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 blah over that, and that now looks very much like Zelenskyy is being humble and Vance is being aggressive. Unfortunately, in this situation, it's just 2 people squabbling, and it does not work well.
Campaign for the opposition in October, offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning.
Yep. So at this point, it may seem like Zelenskyy is standing up for himself when Trump says, you've done a lot of talking, basically shut up. And by still talking, he's standing up for himself. The problem is Trump has now made it clear that he will not let him speak and will not listen. Here's the thing. Without being fed additional words from Zelenskyy, Trump would eventually run out of words. Imagine the optics of Trump just haranguing a world leader for a minute or 2 or 3. It does not make Trump look good. It makes him look like a bully. Unfortunately, because Zelenskyy keeps responding, it makes it look like some kind of conversation where Trump is dominating him.
This.
I
You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said thank
stupid
you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave.
president.
And again, Zelenskyy, he's hearing things, he's just responding, he's being triggered by them. The question of whether or not Biden is America's president like Trump is America's president, because you hear Zelenskyy a few times say, you voted for him. Biden's your president. That's not salient. It is accurate, but it's not salient. It does not add to the conversation. And so this, again, would be a place where it would be better for him to just listen. And there was a moment there where Zelenskyy was saying, I thanked you, I thanked you, I thanked you. But there's a difference between I thanked you in the past and let me thank you right now. I thanked you in the past is let's argue about this. I did. No, you didn't. I did. No, you didn't. But in Zelenskyy's shoes, the more effective move, again, is not right and wrong, because if you've ever been in this kind of situation, it is really hard to come up with the right thing to say under cameras, under pressure, knowing this is a high-stakes conversation. The effective thing to do would have been to pivot it to, let me thank you right now. And so when Trump started saying, we gave you $350 billion, and we did this, and we did that, then the effective response would be like, and thank you for that. Thank you. We thank you for that. And just saying thank you over and over and over again, because it doesn't look weak to say thank you over and over and over again. And it's really hard to yell at someone who's thanking you. You can, but it's not a good look.
But they had to use our military.
What about
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak-
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like that.
All right. So a lot of what's happening, if we watch Zelenskyy, is he is just, look at the look on his face. He's just shocked. He's like, what is going on here? What conversation are we having? Now, you have probably found yourself in a similar situation. You're talking to your boss, you're talking to your spouse, you're talking to your kids or your parents. You're like, how did we get here? What's going on? Same kind of dynamics occurring is you get thrown off. And unfortunately, what Zelenskyy keeps doing is speaking to try to just grab some part of that conversation, to grab some foothold. Unfortunately, you can't do it. So if one thing that I do sometimes is sparring with practice swords. And if you're in a fight and it's going bad, your best thing to do is to take 3 quick steps backwards, to disengage from the fight, and then to re-enter it. Same thing in a sparring conversation. You don't want to stay and just keep swinging wildly. You want to step back out of it. You want to back out. Now, he can see at this moment, like this conversation just took a really bad turn because President Trump is now saying, we can't, this is going to be really hard to do. President Trump, right in this moment, is going to lay the groundwork for in the future, when the deal doesn't go well or doesn't go through, or when he tries to pull support, he's going to say, this is really hard to work. Zelensky's hard to work with. You saw him. And part of that is because Zelenskyy lost control of this conversation. This was a very poor dynamic. Had I been Zelenskyy, I would have said, let's not get on cameras until we have a signed deal, right? So this really went bad when he agreed to get on cameras before the deal, which you never do. You never see this. But you can see that he's definitely thrown off and doesn't know what to do.
Again,
I tell you,
just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good.
So that was really interesting what Vance just did. Rhetorically, that was actually very, very effective. Because the way he did it, he said it with authority and clarity. And so one of the things you want to do if you're talked over, one of the things you want to do if you're being talked over is to simply speak clearly and strongly, and just keep talking at the same tone and same pace, because then you will hold the conversation. It's hard to talk over someone who is just still going through. If you watch Trump and Zelenskyy, there's a lot of but I, and repeating, and it was very weak rhetorically. What Vance did there was he very clearly, actually let's hear it again. Let's go back to that.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong.
All right. So what he said, when I say thank you, which Zelenskyy has said thank you many times, but with the confidence and force that Vance said it with, it's easy for the listener to think, yeah, he should say thank you. And let's accept there are disagreements, which obviously there are. And let's not litigate in front of the American media as if Zelenskyy had set this up. And then when you're wrong, being on that role, everything he says sounds very authoritative and very effective. And unfortunately, Zelenskyy, by losing control of the conversation, set Vice President Vance up for that, and that sort of framed the conversation. Now, Zelenskyy might have wanted to respond at this time, but
We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't, please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this.
All right, so as you can see, at this point, this conversation's basically over. J.D. Vance has made sort of a declarative statement, and then Trump, kind of like a teacher or a moderator, has said, okay, well, I think we've seen what we need to see, and that's why I let this go on the way I did. And he has now positioned it so the audience seeing this says, oh, okay, nothing else is coming after this. We're done. And at this point, it would be very difficult for Zelenskyy to retake the podium, retake the mic, and was really never able to say anything effective after this point. And effectively, it just got to be Trump diatribing on how much good he's done and how great a president he is, and claiming his platform. But what we can learn from this is, first off, don't have your diplomatic conversations on camera unless you're trying to put a kerfuffle on camera, which is what happened. And I'm not going to get into politics, who was trying to do what, who had what kind of agenda. But what I think we can really learn from is watching Zelenskyy and how he deals with the situation. He does not deal with it very well, but there's a lot of lessons we can take from it. And the most important one is to not speak unless you have the microphone, figuratively or literally. Figuratively, literally, if I've got the microphone and you're arguing with me, then my voice sounds strong and yours sounds weak. But even rhetorically, in the conversation, you don't want to be, getting into this, yeah, I did that, but I. It sounds weak, it sounds ineffective, and it sounds both weak and disrespectful. Because in the frame of this conversation, what Trump has done very well in this conversation is he's framed it as, this is my conversation and you are the guest at the conversation. Another thing that we see, I've heard some people criticize Zelensky's choice of attire. He's a head of state. He can dress however he wants. However, you will notice Trump looks bigger. Trump is wearing a sport coat that has shoulder padding. I don't know if it's actually padding, but the way a sport coat works, it makes you look bigger. I think Trump is actually a larger man, wider. And so even in a suit, even if you are hunched over, you don't look as hunched over because the suit gives you a certain lines. Whereas Zelenskyy, with his look, which is, the look of a man leading a country at war, it's not a bad look. But when you look at them side by side, it gives Trump more of a look of authority. And then Trump then takes that and verbally does the same thing. He positions himself in authority and forces Zelenskyy to be responding. And so once you have that power dynamic set up both visually, and it's in the White House, right? So he's got the home field advantage. Once you're in that position, there's a way to respond. Look, and here's the most important thing. Always good to have the most important thing 33 minutes into the video. Here's the most important thing is it doesn't matter if Trump convinces Zelenskyy or Zelenskyy convinces Trump. And it kind of does because they're heads of state talking, but they're on camera. So what really matters is how this plays to the camera. What does the camera see? What does the audience see? So if Zelenskyy had let Trump talk more, that may sound like it's weak. That may sound like he's allowing himself to be bullied or talked over, but it looks very, very strong. If Zelenskyy tries to speak, and then Trump talks over him, and Zelenskyy just stops and sits back. And in fact, I think posture-wise, they were leaned forward. What I'd do posturally is if I tried to speak, was spoken over, I'd sit back in the chair, not slouching, that looks petulant, but sit back, move his tailbone to the back of the chair, maybe fold hands on his lap, and just listen. Because that is both the appearance of and the parody of a student listening to a teacher. So if Trump's just going to lecture, then listen to the lecture. Okay, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Could I share something, please? Right? There's ways to do that are respectful and in the language of decorum, but which also show to the audience what's really happening. So if Zelenskyy was listening attentively and Trump is, yelling at him, or lecturing him, Trump didn't yell, but he did speak very strongly, then it would have put Zelenskyy in a much stronger position to respond, because he would have said, I've listened to you. Could you listen to me for a moment? And if Trump then did what he might have done, which is, say, oh, you talked enough and blah, 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 well, the video clip of Zelenskyy saying, I've listened to you, could you listen to me? And then Trump talking over that would not play well for Trump. Unfortunately, a lot of the clips of this can make Zelenskyy look very rude. Because if you pull a clip out of this and they're going back and forth, it could look rude, especially because of the visual created. Again, not judging Zelenskyy for how he dressed, but he did not dress in a way that projects as much power and authority as Trump did. And so that creates a dynamic as well. So my whole purpose in this video is not to say one of these men did the right thing or the wrong thing. Really, I think most of them did the wrong thing. Rhetorically, J.D. Vance actually did a couple things where he did something really effective. I don't know if I agree with why he did it, but his messaging, his claiming the floor was very effective. One of the things you notice with J.D. Vance is he was rarely interrupted effectively. And when he spoke and just held that conversation. He didn't do it in a way that forms dialogue, but he did it in a way that's very rhetorically effective for holding control of the conversation. Now, that said, people inclined to agree with Vance would say that's a strong leader, and people inclined to disagree with Vance would say that's a rude jerk, he talked over his own question. But people in the middle who are not quite sure wouldn't notice that he talked over his own question and would notice he got his point across clearly, because you can see that what J.D. Vance does, he formulates a thought well and then launches that whole thought, whereas Zelenskyy was often very reactive. That he would be formulating thought as he went, which part of that's because he doesn't speak the language natively, but he's also just reactive, and that is less effective. It's important to have the thought and know what point you're trying to make and how you're going to land it before you just sort of start letting it out. It's better to not start speaking than to start speaking and be cut off. So I shared this because, one, there's a lot we can learn by watching these three men interact, and mostly by seeing how they did it wrong and how we could do it right, and a couple times by seeing how we could do it right. And also because I think it's a more interesting conversation than who was respectful and who was right and who was wrong. And who was wrong? Who was wrong was anyone who decided this thing should be televised live, right? That was wrong. That should not have happened. This conversation should not have happened. It should have been done like every other. You have a conversation behind closed doors. And then after it's done, you come out and you have the press event to discuss what you have already done. The only reasons you would do this in this way would be if you didn't want it to happen. If you didn't want the deal to go through. Because an hour-long open press conference with both parties who have not reached final agreement is almost guaranteed to foul that deal. I'm not saying what anyone's intentions were. I'm not saying if this was someone was trying to foul the deal or if they just don't understand how diplomacy works. But that is simply a well-understood fact. So I hope you found this interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I know it ran a bit long, but it was a long video and a lot to talk about. Maybe you liked it, maybe you didn't. If you didn't like it, you're probably not getting to this point in the video. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And a little bit about me. I didn't want to introduce myself before. It wasn't important. A little bit about me if you are interested. My name is Michael Whitehouse. I go by the guy who knows a guy. And I'm a business coach, but part of that is spiritual coach. Part of that is mindset coaching. Part of that is business tactics. But a lot of it is figuring out what's going on in your own head, getting your stuff clear, getting yourself in alignment, and making that happen. So if you're interested in connecting about that in any way, by all means, get in touch with me. I'd love to talk and see if I can help you in any way. And if there's other conversations like this, other videos like this you'd like to see me do a breakdown of, that was really fun. I really enjoyed going through it. I think this is a much more productive way to go through, look at these events than to simply be like, my guy's right, your guy's wrong. This red team, blue team stuff doesn't help anyone. It's not, this isn't the Eagles and the Chiefs. This is American democracy. So it's not my guy's right, your guy's right. It's what's best for America, what's best for the world. That's really the most important thing. So thank you for watching all the way to the end. I appreciate you. And As I've heard a few people say, take care of yourself, and if you can, take care of someone else.